Nobody in that family was prepared for what was finally said out loud. For years, your soulmate believed that the night they lost you was simply the night everything went wrong between you. They believed the distance was your choice. They believed your silence meant you had stopped caring. But now, one family member has finally admitted that the story your soulmate was told was never the full truth. And once this confession began, there was no way to take it back. Listen carefully, because the most painful part of this story is not that your soulmate lost you. It is that they may have lost you because someone they trusted allowed them to believe something that was never true. That family member had carried the secret for years. Every family gathering, every conversation about the past, every time your name almost came up, they felt the weight of what they knew. They had watched your soulmate try to move forward. They had watched them pretend that losing you no longer mattered. But behind closed doors, they knew something the rest of the family refused to discuss. Then, without warning, your soulmate asked one simple question. What really happened that night? The room changed instantly. Nobody answered. One person looked down. Another tried to change the subject. Someone quietly said that the past should remain in the past. But your soulmate refused to let it go this time. Something inside them had been telling them for too long that pieces of the story were missing. And that was when one family member finally broke. Their voice started shaking before the first sentence was even finished. They admitted that you had not disappeared the way your soulmate had been told. You had not simply turned your back. You had not walked away without feeling anything. Something happened that night, something your soulmate was deliberately kept from understanding. Your soulmate stared at them in complete disbelief. For years, they had carried anger toward you. For years, they had replayed that night and wondered how someone they loved so deeply could suddenly become distant. They had built an entire explanation around the version of events they were given. Now that explanation was beginning to collapse. The family member confessed that there had been a conversation before everything fell apart. Certain words were passed between people. A decision was made without your soulmate knowing the entire reason behind it. And by the time your soulmate realized you were gone, the damage had already been done. Don't skip what comes next, because the family member still hadn't revealed the one detail they had been terrified to confess. Your soulmate stepped closer and asked, "What did they do that night that I never knew about?" The family member's eyes filled with tears. They looked around the room as though they were asking permission to expose something the family had buried for far too long. Then they finally said, "You were supposed to find out the truth that same night. But someone made sure you never did." And the moment your soulmate heard who that person was, they stopped speaking completely. For several seconds, your soulmate could only stare at the family member standing in front of them. The name they had just heard was not the name of an enemy, a stranger, or someone they had ever suspected. It was someone they had trusted completely. Someone whose advice they had accepted without question. Someone who had stood beside them during the heartbreak and quietly watched while they blamed you for everything. That realization hurt more than the confession itself. Your soulmate slowly asked, why would they do that to us? The family member lowered their eyes. They had known this question was coming, but knowing it would be asked did not make answering it any easier. They explained that the person responsible had convinced themselves they were protecting your soulmate's future. They believed you would eventually pull your soulmate toward a life they could not control. They were afraid your connection was becoming too serious, too powerful, and too difficult for the family to influence. So they interfered. Not with one dramatic act, but through small decisions that created one enormous misunderstanding. A message that should have reached your soulmate never reached them. A conversation that should have happened between the two of you was interrupted before it could begin. And something you said that night was repeated differently. Your soulmate's face changed when they heard that. What did they tell me you said? Nobody wanted to answer. But the family member had already gone too far to stop. They reminded your soulmate of the sentence that had broken them years ago, the sentence they had believed came directly from you. The words that made them believe you had chosen to leave, but someone stopped that conversation from happening. Your soulmate immediately asked, "Then why didn't you come back?" The family member swallowed hard. Because this was the question that led to the deepest part of the secret. They explained that after everything happened, you were given a reason to believe your soulmate had already made their decision. You believed they had chosen their family over you. Meanwhile, your soulmate believed you had chosen to disappear. Two people were walking away from each other while both believed the other had made the first choice. And someone inside that family knew it. For years. Your soulmate sat down slowly. They could barely process it. All those nights wondering why you never returned. All those moments trying to convince themselves they had stopped loving you. All the times they almost searched for you but stopped because they remembered what they had supposedly been told. Now those memories felt completely different. "Did you wait for me?" Your soulmate asked quietly. The family member started crying. That reaction immediately told your soulmate the answer was going to hurt. They admitted that for a while, you did wait. You waited for a call. You waited for an explanation. You waited for some sign that your soulmate knew what had really happened. But that sign never came. Your soulmate covered their face. That single detail destroyed the story they had believed for years. Because while they had been waiting for you to return, you had apparently been waiting for them too. Don't skip this part, because what happened next changed your soulmate's sadness into determination. They looked directly at the family member and asked one final question. "If all of this is true, why are you telling me now?" The family member wiped their tears and reached into an old drawer nearby. From the back, they pulled out something your soulmate had never seen before. A small envelope. It was worn around the edges, as though it had been hidden and moved many times over the years. Your soulmate immediately noticed their own name written across the front. Their hands started trembling. Where did this come from? The family member couldn't look at them. Then they whispered, "You left this behind that night." Your soulmate froze. They reached for the envelope, but before opening it, they asked the question that made the entire room silent. If you left this for me, why am I only seeing it now? The family member looked toward the doorway. And then came another confession. Because the person who separated you didn't just hide the truth. They hid this too. Your soulmate opened the envelope. Inside was something written years ago in your words. They read the first few lines silently. Then suddenly stopped. Their eyes filled with tears. Because whatever you had written proved one thing beyond any doubt. You had never intended to abandon them. But halfway through the message, your soulmate discovered a sentence that revealed something even bigger, something the family member had still not confessed. Your soulmate looked up from the letter and asked in disbelief, "What promise did you make that night? And why did nobody ever tell me?" The family member went completely still. That question was the one they had hoped your soulmate would never ask, because the promise written inside that old letter connected every hidden piece of that night. Your soulmate looked down again and read the sentence one more time, slowly, as if they needed to make sure they were understanding it correctly. You had written that no matter what happened, you would never expose the family secret if exposing it meant destroying your soulmate's relationship with the people they loved. You were willing to carry the blame. You were willing to be misunderstood. You were even willing to walk away without defending yourself if that was the only way to keep your soulmate from being pulled into a painful family conflict. Your soulmate's hands began trembling. "So you knew?" they asked. The family member nodded. You had discovered that someone close to the family had been interfering for longer than anyone realized. Conversations had been twisted. Information had been withheld. Every time you and your soulmate moved closer together, another misunderstanding somehow appeared. At first, you thought it was coincidence. But on that final night, you discovered enough to understand that somebody was deliberately pushing the two of you apart. Your soulmate immediately wanted a name, but the family member said there was something they needed to understand first. You could have exposed everything that night. You had enough information to create chaos inside the family. But instead, you made a choice nobody understood until now. You refused to destroy your soulmate's world just to prove that you were innocent. That was the promise. You promised that if silence protected your soulmate from a devastating truth, you would remain silent until the truth could no longer hurt them in the same way. Your soulmate lowered their head. For years they had interpreted your silence as rejection. Now they were discovering that your silence may have been sacrifice. Every angry thought they had carried toward you suddenly felt unbearably heavy. They remembered telling people that you had abandoned them. They remembered forcing themselves to erase your name from conversations. They remembered pretending that what happened between you meant nothing anymore. But the letter in their hands told a completely different story. Then your soulmate noticed something near the bottom of the page. A date. And beside that date was another sentence. If they ever learn what really happened, tell them I never stopped believing they would eventually find the truth. Your soulmate could no longer hold back their tears. They asked the family member whether you had ever tried to contact them again. The answer was yes. Not once. More than once. And that confession changed the atmosphere in the room immediately. There had been another message months later. Then another attempt after that. But your soulmate never saw either one. Who stopped them? Your soulmate demanded. This time the family member answered without hesitation. The same person. The same person who had convinced your soulmate that you wanted nothing to do with them had also made sure your attempts to reconnect never reached them. Your soulmate stood up. The sadness on their face was disappearing. Something stronger was replacing it. They wanted every detail, every message, every conversation, every secret that had been hidden. No more protecting reputations. No more protecting the family from uncomfortable questions. They had already lost years believing a version of events that was never true, and they refused to lose another day. Don't skip what happened next, because this was the moment the confession became impossible for the family to contain. Your soulmate asked whether anyone else knew. The family member slowly looked toward the others in the room. Nobody spoke. That silence was enough. Your soulmate realized this secret had never belonged to just one person. Several people had known pieces of it. Some knew about the message. Some knew about the letter. Some knew you had tried to return. But nobody had ever put everything together in front of your soulmate. Until now. Then an older family member finally whispered, "There is something else." Your soulmate turned around immediately. What else could there possibly be? The older family member disappeared into another room and returned carrying a small box. Inside were several old papers, a photograph, and one unopened envelope. Your soulmate recognized your handwriting immediately. But this envelope was different. It had been written much later than the first one. Your soulmate looked at the date and froze. Because according to everything they had believed, by that point you should have completely moved on. Yet there was their name across the front. They opened it carefully. The first sentence made them sit down again. You had written that you had recently learned the real reason your soulmate never came looking for you. And instead of anger, your words contained something your soulmate never expected. Understanding. You had finally realized that your soulmate had been deceived too. Your soulmate continued reading until they reached the final paragraph. Then they suddenly looked at the family member. Where is the rest? Part of the letter was missing. Someone had deliberately removed the final page. The family member's face turned pale. Because that final page contained the one thing nobody in the room wanted your soulmate to see. It revealed where you planned to go after discovering the truth. And more importantly, it revealed exactly what you wanted your soulmate to do if this letter ever reached them. Your soulmate looked around the room and said, "Find that page." Nobody moved. Then a quiet voice came from behind them. You don't need to find it." Everyone turned. One family member had been standing near the doorway the entire time, saying absolutely nothing. They reached into their pocket and pulled out an old folded piece of paper. Your soulmate recognized the handwriting immediately. It was the missing page. And before handing it over, that family member said something that made the entire room go silent once again. "If you read this, you're going to understand why you never truly disappeared from your life. And why what happened that night may not be the end of your story." Your soulmate did not reach for the missing page immediately. They simply stared at it, realizing that this small folded piece of paper had been sitting inside the hands of someone who could have changed everything years ago. The family member holding it could barely meet their eyes. The room had become so quiet that even the slightest movement felt loud. Finally, your soulmate asked, "How long have you had this?" The answer came almost as a whisper. "Since that night." And those 3 words brought every buried emotion rushing back again. Your soulmate took the page and unfolded it carefully. The paper had aged, but your words were still clear. They began reading, and almost immediately their expression changed. You had written that if this page ever reached them, then the truth had finally survived all the people who tried to bury it. You explained that you never wanted your soulmate to spend their life feeling guilty for what happened. You knew there was a chance they had been manipulated just as much as you had been hurt, and because of that, you refused to hate them. That sentence broke something inside your soulmate. They had spent years wondering whether you hated them. They had imagined you remembering them with anger. They had convinced themselves that too much time had passed for anything between you to matter anymore. But your own words were telling them something completely different. The letter continued. You wrote that there had been one moment that night when you almost turned around. You had already started leaving when something inside you told you to go back and speak directly to your soulmate. You didn't want your story to end through someone else's words. You wanted to look into their eyes and let them decide what they believed. So you went back. Your soulmate stopped reading. What? The family member looked down. Your soulmate repeated the sentence aloud. You came back that night? Nobody answered. Their voice became stronger. Did you come back for me? Finally, someone nodded. Yes. You had returned. And this was the detail your soulmate had never been told. You came back hoping to speak to them one final time. But before you could reach them, someone met you first. That person told you that your soulmate had already made their decision and did not want to see you. At the same time, your soulmate had been told you were already gone. 2 people were standing painfully close to each other that night, each believing the other had refused one final conversation. Your soulmate covered their mouth in disbelief. How close? The family member hesitated. Then they admitted something devastating. You had been outside. Your soulmate had been inside. Only a door separated you. For one brief moment, both of you were waiting for the other to appear. Neither knew it. Your soulmate closed their eyes as the memory returned. They remembered that night more clearly now. They remembered standing alone, secretly hoping you would come back. They remembered hearing movement outside and almost walking toward the door. But someone stopped them. Someone told them there was no reason to go outside because you had already left. Now they knew that was a lie. Don't skip this moment, because what your soulmate realized next changed their feelings about the entire past. They looked directly at the person who had kept the missing page and asked, "Why didn't you tell me?" The family member started crying. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of the family falling apart. Afraid of exposing the person responsible. Afraid that your soulmate would never forgive anyone involved. So they chose silence. And that silence lasted for years." Your soulmate looked around the room and said quietly, "Everyone was afraid of what the truth would do to this family. Did anyone ever think about what the lie was doing to us?" Nobody had an answer. Then your soulmate returned to the letter. Near the bottom of the page, you had written one final request. You did not ask them to chase the past. You did not demand an apology. You did not ask them to turn against their family. Instead, you wrote that if they ever discovered the truth, they should make one decision for themselves, without pressure, without fear, and without allowing anyone else to speak for their heart. Your soulmate read those words several times. Then they noticed one final line underneath. "If there is still something inside you that remembers us, don't let someone else decide what that memory means." The letter slipped slightly from their hands. Because something inside them did remember. More than they had ever admitted. Your soulmate had tried to move forward. They had built routines around the absence. They had learned how to speak about the past without revealing how deeply it still affected them. But your name had never become completely ordinary to them. And now they understood why. Their story had never received an honest ending. Your soulmate suddenly asked, "Does anyone know where you are now?" The family exchanged nervous looks. That reaction immediately caught their attention. Someone knows. One person tried to explain that too much time had passed and contacting you might reopen old wounds. Your soulmate interrupted them. "No. You don't get to decide that anymore." For the first time, there was no hesitation in their voice. Nobody else would choose what they were allowed to know. Nobody else would decide whether they were allowed to speak to you. Nobody else would write the ending of this story. Then the family member who had made the original confession reached for their phone. They had something saved. Not your address. Not your private information. Something simpler. A message that had arrived much more recently than your soulmate expected. They turned the screen around. Your soulmate saw your name. Their heart seemed to stop. The message was not from years ago. It was recent. Your soulmate looked at the date twice to make sure they were seeing it correctly. Then they asked, "Why did you contact the family again?" The family member opened the message. There were only a few lines. But the final sentence changed everything. You had not written asking whether your soulmate still loved you. You had not asked whether they regretted the past. You had asked only one question. Did they ever learn what really happened that night? Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears again. After all that time, you still wanted to know whether the truth had reached them. And now it finally had. Your soulmate looked at the phone, then at the family, and made a decision nobody in that room expected. Reply. The family member stared at them. What should I say? Your soulmate took the phone into their own hands. For several seconds, they couldn't type. There were too many things they wanted to say and too many years sitting between the first word and the last. Finally, they typed a short message. But before sending it, they looked around the room and said, "This time, nobody speaks for me." Then they pressed send. And what came back moments later made your soulmate realize that the confession about that night had opened a door neither of you believed would ever open again. The reply appeared sooner than anyone expected. Your soulmate stared at the screen, almost afraid to open it, because after all these years, this was no longer a memory speaking back to them. It was you. The person they had spent years believing had chosen to disappear. The message was simple. You had been waiting for only one thing, the day your soulmate finally learned the truth. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears as every misunderstanding from that night suddenly lost its power. The family could no longer rewrite what happened. Nobody could hide another letter, stop another conversation, or decide what either of you deserved to know. Your soulmate walked away from the room and found somewhere quiet. For the first time, they wanted to respond without anyone watching, advising, or interfering. They typed several sentences, deleted them, started again, then finally wrote from the heart. They told you they knew everything now. They knew you had tried to come back that night. They knew you had waited. They knew your words had been changed. And most painfully, they knew both of you had spent years believing the other person had chosen the separation. Your soulmate didn't ask you to erase the past. They didn't pretend those lost years could simply be returned. They asked for something much smaller. One honest conversation. No family standing between you. No hidden messages. No assumptions. Just you and them finally speaking about the night that changed everything. When your soulmate sent those words, they had no idea how you would respond. Then another message appeared. Your soulmate read it once. Then again. And suddenly they smiled through their tears. Because you wanted that conversation too. Don't skip what this means. This wasn't about pretending nothing painful happened. It was about finally allowing truth to stand where misunderstanding had lived for years. Your soulmate turned toward the family and made one thing clear: whatever happened next would belong to the two people whose choices had been taken away that night. Nobody else would decide. Nobody else would interfere. And nobody else would speak for you again. The family member who finally confessed began crying, but your soulmate didn't respond with anger. They simply said, "You should have told me sooner." Then they walked away holding the phone. Because for the first time in years, your soulmate wasn't walking away from you. They were walking toward the truth. Maybe one conversation cannot return every lost year. Maybe forgiveness will take time. Maybe some questions still need answers. But one thing has finally changed forever. Your soulmate no longer believes you abandoned them. They finally know what really happened the night they lost you. And now that the truth has reached both of you, the ending that someone else forced upon your story no longer has to remain the final chapter. Because this time, if another chapter begins, it will begin with honesty. It will begin without interference. And most importantly, it will be a choice made by you and your soulmate, together.